Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 204 of the podcast for July 17th, 2014. My guest today is Paul Plsek, and we're talking about his excellent book that's titled Accelerating Healthcare Transformation with Lean and Innovation, the Virginia Mason Experience. Virginia Mason is, of course, Virginia Mason Medical Center, an outstanding lean healthcare organization. Paul's book is a Shingo Research Award recipient. We were both at the award ceremony in Ohio back in May. And I think we have a really good discussion today. Paul's going to talk about a number of topics, including how lean and innovation go together in an organization like Virginia Mason and how that can apply to you. He's going to talk about how an organization and individuals can learn to be innovative. And we're also going to talk about the health system board's role in creating an innovation and improvement strategy. So I think you'll enjoy this discussion and the book. You can find links to Paul's website and the book if you go to leanpodcast/204. Thanks for listening. Well, Paul, hi. Thanks for being a guest on the podcast today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm fine. Thank you.
Good. Well, can you start off, for listeners who don't yet know your book and your work, can you kind of introduce yourself and your own professional background for us?
Yeah, I'm an engineer by background, electrical and systems engineering. Started off my life in AT&T Bell Laboratories, where I learned a lot about innovation, and left there in the mid-'80s to go off on my own as a management consultant. I've worked with a variety of companies. But in the late 80s, I met Don Berwick and others, and 4 or 5 of us started what became the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. And I became really fascinated with taking what I knew and learned as an engineer and bringing it into the world of healthcare. And so since the late 80s, my work's been almost exclusively with healthcare organizations. I have clients across the U.S., Europe, UK, Scandinavia, and Asia Pacific region. And I enjoy the travel. I enjoy seeing all the different organizational forms and all the different ways that organizations play themselves out, and just really enjoy that life. I describe my work as trying to help organizations think better. That's what I think I do.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't realize, even though I read good chunks of the book here, I didn't make the connection or didn't remember the connection to IHI and Don Berwick. So, kind of harkening back to the title of the book here, The Need for Healthcare Transformation. I guess this is something that you and Don Berwick and people have been looking at for a long time now, right? I mean,
yeah, I remember the early, the very first courses we had, and Don would always give the starting off lecture, and he would talk about how, and this was in the late 80s, talking about how the whole system was just unsustainable, and we had to make massive transformational change. It's been a whole lot slower than any of us ever imagined it would be. Yeah. But I think the urgency has just gotten more and more. The pressure and the need for transformation is even greater today than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think to say the least. And so one of those organizations that has been doing so much, and I've really admired for a long time, doing so much to help transform healthcare, is Virginia Mason Medical Center in Seattle. Of course, the subject of your book here. Can you talk a little bit about the story behind the book? How did you get connected with the folks at Virginia Mason to be working with them or studying them?
Yeah, back in the early 90s, the leadership then invited Don Berwick and I to come out and teach some really basic quality improvement courses, and we did. And we actually developed some training material for them, which they took on their own. And I think they used those basic methods through the 90s. Then in the late 90s, and we kind of I lost touch with them. In the late 90s, they had a couple of years of negative margin, and Gary Kaplan, there was kind of a classic meeting of all the leadership, clinical and administrative, and he said we either change or we die. And so they decided to search for a a different management method, a different way to approach problems and issues and opportunities in the organization, and came across lean thinking. It was a chance occurrence. The president of the hospital, Mike Rona, was seated on an airplane across country with John Black, who's an author in this area, and they really. Virginia Mason really embraced lean thinking as an approach to removing the waste out of their operations. Along with that, the strategic plan and input from the board, they wanted to also be highly innovative, and so there was a little bit of a clash between can you be lean and innovative, and there's basically kind of three what I think we've proven and what I think the book proves are myths. There's a myth that lean thinking methods are about widgets and healthcare is about people, and therefore it doesn't translate. That's a myth. There's a myth that says lean thinking has standard work, and that's by definition anti-creative, because if you have to do it a standard way, it's anti-creative. That's a myth. And a third one is that lean's emphasis on efficiency ignores the human dimension of things, and healthcare is all about the human dimension. I think we've proven that to be a myth. And so the book is about. They invited me back in 2003 and asked me if I would assume a role which they call the chair of innovation, which means I visit with them 4 or 5 times a year and work with them to integrate creative thinking and innovation methods into their lean work. And the book basically is the story of that 10 plus years of effort to meld the two, to marry innovation and lean.
Yeah, and 2003, I mean, that was right about the beginning of their work with lean, the development of the Virginia Mason production system, right?
Yeah, they actually started, their first project was in late 2001. And so like most organizations, they started off slow, 1 or 2 projects because it was a big deal and a big mindset change. And then a few more projects the following year. And 2003, they were really just kind of starting to ramp up and saying, yeah, I think this could work. I think this is good stuff. We should be doing this across the medical center, which by the way is both a hospital and outpatient clinic operation. So it's a truly complete kind of medical center setting.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about those 3 myths. Those are still, even here in 2014, I think pretty often thrown around. I think a lot of the, if you will, resistance to lean. I think the word resistance is kind of a loaded term, but the when people are coming out publicly as somehow opposed to lean healthcare, they're really usually coming out being opposed to one of those 3 myths, and I think that's where we would all have a lot of agreement that we're all opposed to those bad things and those misperceptions of lean, that maybe just come from the word or from not really knowing what it's about, or even thinking about some of the history in healthcare of other things that would be quote unquote anti-creative that people have been subjected to. I mean, how often do you find people are kind of reacting to, things that healthcare management has done in the past as opposed to, these new ideas of lean?
Oh, that is a huge issue in healthcare. Healthcare people have such incredibly long memories because most of the kind of middle managers and frontline staff, nurses, doctors, and things in a healthcare organization have lived through 3 or 4 senior leadership teams. Senior leadership teams in many healthcare organizations come through a revolving door, and they've also lived through 3 or 4 kind of merger and acquisition things. And they still identify themselves with the such and such hospital, which doesn't exist anymore. It's that hospital is actually part of some larger system, but they don't identify with the larger system. No, I think and it's one of the problems with improvement work in healthcare. I think people there's such a surfs up kind of mentality, TQM, re-engineering, lean. And everybody says, "Oh, that's the thing to do. Let's do it." They don't necessarily understand it very well. They don't do it very well. They don't understand it deeply enough to do it. But they quickly decide, "Oh, it didn't work," and
right.
and so there builds up in the organizational culture this idea of, "Oh, it's just another thing. They'll forget about it a year from now," and that is a huge issue in healthcare organizations that I don't
Yeah.
think is quite the same in other industries.
Well, I mean, I think other industries, have that, if you will, program of the month mentality. I think
Mm,
there's, kind of two views. If people are skeptical or opposed to lean, they'll say, okay, well, let's just wait this out because it'll go away.
yeah.
What I've seen happen a lot, though, is that, nurses and frontline staff get exposed to lean. They're excited about it. They're excited about the opportunity to be involved and the improvements, or maybe some of those early experiments are leading to good things. And then they're very much concerned that it'll be a program of the month. Or I've had a lot of frontline staff will ask, how do I know our leaders are really committed to this? They're not going to get bored. They're not going to move on. I mean, I think they're really scared that if there's good things happening, that it's going to fade away.
Yeah, it's what W. Edwards Deming told us 50, 60 years ago. Establish constancy of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and that's probably the most that's probably the most difficult thing for any organization to do, is to establish constancy of purpose.
Yeah. Well, so let's come back maybe to the topic of innovation before we talk about lean and innovation going together. What's your succinct definition of innovation? I think the word gets thrown around a lot as a buzzword, and companies say we want to be innovative. Okay, well, what does that mean? How would you explain it? What should it mean?
A succinct definition that we use at the Virginia Mason Medical Center is directed creativity implemented. And so there's each of those three words is kind of important. I'll start from the back. It's got to be implemented, and I think that's where lean is an excellent system for testing and implementing new ideas. The difference between innovation and incremental improvement is that innovation has a sense of creativity about it. It's novel. It's new and surprising in some way. It's also useful. It may involve connecting things together that have never been connected before. And so the Virginia Mason was one of the first places in the country to establish a drive-through flu shot clinic, which is just a connection of something that's very common in the fast food industry with something that is needed in the healthcare world. So that creativity that kind of connects things that you don't normally think of as connected. And then the first word, directed. Yeah, you can do innovation by saying, oh, we'll just take all any creative ideas you got, we'll just kind of do it. But then you're kind of pulling in 15 directions at once. You might not get anywhere. So having some strategic focus to it. We want to be innovative in these topics, in these areas, and we're gonna purposefully set out to come up with some novel approaches to these things. Yes, we'll incrementally improve the way we have always done it. We should always be doing that, taking the waste out and making it a little bit better. But in parallel with that, let's think about blowing it up and imagining it in a completely different way. So innovation has all three of those characteristics as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think that idea of creating something new, of being novel and creative. People often give lean, or think they're kind of unfair and saying, well, lean is just about tweaking what you've already got. And I say, well, no. If you look at very kind of formal, structured lean methodologies around doing the space design and the process design for a new hospital tower, it's very much I think a process for innovation. And again, I guess that phrase might strike people as odd. How do you have a process for innovation? It doesn't just happen, right?
Oh, I don't think. I think if you talk to people in general industry about having a process for innovation, they would say, "Well, of course you have to have a process for innovation." I mean, I learned about, as I said, innovation in Bell Laboratories, AT&T. We had a very definite process for innovation. We had targeted areas that we were working on. We generated lots of ideas. You presented those ideas to a steering group, what's called a stage gate process. So you have a stage in which your idea generating, and then you go through the gate, which is to say, here's the things we've thought of, and here's what we think are promising, and let's get some feedback on that, and are any of these promising enough to establish some resources to it, and then you develop it further. Now, I think there's a very deliberate process of innovation, and anyone who thinks that innovation in successful companies just happens out of the blue doesn't really understand the history of innovation and the process of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see similar things. For those who talk about the lean startup movement, there's kind of a mythology that, well, startups just happen, that people just have this amazing idea. And, when there's actually, a lot of structure and methodology around, understanding your customer and testing ideas and validating ideas. And it's usually not that first spark of an idea that goes to market, that there's structure around that very creative process of entrepreneurial innovation as well. So I see some kind of common themes there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm working here in I'm actually in an office in DC doing this podcast with you, and one of the organizations here is a thing called 1776. It's a startup incubator. And you talk to the entrepreneurs in there that are working on various things, and they've done a heck of a lot of thinking and a heck of a lot of market research, and really, getting out with people to say what is the real need and what might we be able to offer to fill a need. Otherwise, you've just got an idea that's in search of a need. And sometimes I guess you could get lucky. You could come up with an idea that it finds a need. But I don't think that's the usual approach. I think the usual approach starts from understanding the needs of the customer and what would be value for the customer, which is of course a key principle in Lean.
Yeah. So I'm curious, talking more about Virginia Mason and back to your definition of innovation, this idea of directed creativity that's implemented. What are some of the the high level management processes or practices that are in place to help kind of create that proper direction to the goals and strategies and the things that Virginia Mason is trying to accomplish through their mission or annual objectives or things like that?
Well, it starts all the way from the top with the board. I mean, the Virginia Mason has had a single strategic plan since 2001, I think, when they came up with it. It's on one sheet of paper. It's a pyramid, basically, and at the top of the pyramid is the patient. And what they say is innovation, change, improvement, everything we do is about achieving the perfect patient experience. So that clarity of goal, it's all about the perfect patient experience. And then that trickles through a kind of a Hoshin planning process that they have to set annual sub goals and pick topic areas. So they might be working for a year or two on transitions of care from out of the hospital to home, or working on eliminating delirium in patients, or the orthopedic surgery pathway from the first clinic visit all the way to the return to function. So they pick processes and systems and topic areas on an annual basis. Sometimes it gets picked and then it's worked on for 2 or 3 years, and those become the focus of we really want to make some breakthrough ideas here. We really want to try to change some things and make things different here. And then that gets translated into a whole series of week-long rapid process improvement workshops, or 2 or 3 day Kaizen events and local events. So Lean becomes the mechanism by which they test and implement new ideas. So it's a very structured process that aligns the organization up and down. It's not a top-down process, although I described it that way. It's a declaration of a direction we're trying to go, a goal we're trying to reach, and the bottom up is, well, here's some ideas that we have about how we can make the perfect patient experience. So here we've observed patients moving through our cancer center, and here's what we've observed that we need to change in that if we were going to really have a perfect patient experience. And then senior leadership saying, if that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. We'll find the resources, the budget, whatever it takes to make that transformation happen.
Yeah, and I think there's more and more organizations in healthcare that are trying to adopt some of the tactics of Hoshin planning or strategy deployment. What seems a bit more unusual is that commitment, that constancy of purpose, if you will, around a goal is clear and is far kind of setting a stake in the ground to say perfect patient experience. I mean, that guidepost seems like it's a really important part of the process, that it's constant, and there's not a different theme each year that the organization is whipping around, right? I mean, that commitment is pretty serious and pretty consistent at Virginia Mason, right?
Yeah, it certainly is, and the best I've seen at it, and seeing lots of other organizations who I think struggle. An element of that struggle, a common element of that struggling to improve and transform is constantly shifting goals. One year it's about patient experience, or the next year it's about cost cutting, and the next year it's about people development or whatever else. They can't take, and Virginia Mason works on all of those things, but they consider them sub goals to the ultimate goal of the perfect patient experience. So if I'm working on staff development, people development, respect for people, or those kinds of things, it's because I'm trying to create an organization that has members of staff who are capable and competent and desirous of producing a perfect patient experience. If I'm working on financial things, it's because I'm trying to get the waste out of the system so that I can provide the patient a more value added stay. All these things that the patient wouldn't pay for if we charged them for it. If we asked them to pay to wait in the waiting room, would they pay? And they said, no, I don't want to pay to wait in the waiting room. So why do we make them wait in the waiting room? Let's get that out. And oh, by the way, we save a lot of floor space and we meet our financial goals.
Now, looking back, from I guess the beginning of your involvement in 2003 to today, how would you say Virginia Mason would characterize being more innovative? How much more innovative are they today in terms of the problems that they're solving, the new things they're creating today compared to before?
I think they would say that it's a continuous journey. I think what they find is what most organizations find, that the more you do, the more you see you could do. It is that peeling of the onion, or that working down the iceberg, or whatever metaphor you want to use. I think they would say that the language of innovation is much more common in the organization now. They don't hear standard work is anti-innovation, and in fact, there's a number of quotes in the book from senior physicians and managers saying just the opposite. That what they find is that actually by doing standard work on the things that are routine, it gives them more time to think of the other stuff that they could actually transform and improve. So I think they've made a great deal of progress in just making it a part of the culture of the organization that they strive for innovation, and that they're prepared for it, and they're always striving. They're always looking for it. They're always looking for a way to do it different than they have before. It's there's not as much challenge of we're healthcare, we have to do it this way. We've always done it that way. That kind of conversation doesn't happen all that much at VM anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of, it sounds like a transition to the more positive language. I mean, a really fundamental level of how do we make this happen, as opposed to here's all the reasons why that we can't. I mean, I think a lot of organizations have that self-fulfilling, self-defeating prophecy where they won't talk about perfect patient experience. They won't talk about zero harm because they say, well, that's not possible. That'll demoralize people. When I think it can actually be quite inspiring to have goals like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Virginia Mason folks think that energizes people, and they've got example after example of where they are now hitting 100% compliance or 0% error in things because people have come up with simple yet novel ways of making sure that happens.
And I mean, it seems like the other thing that makes that energizing is, I think, harkening back to Dr. Deming, that, it's not just a slogan. They're not just putting up posters that say perfect patient experience. There's a lot of action behind this. There's a lot of action behind the work towards zero defects in supportive ways, right?
Yeah, and in both on both sides of the coin, they tell the story of ways that they have made the experience better, and they tell the story of ways in which it still goes wrong and things happen. They're very transparent about errors and mistakes and things that happen. They have a stop the line process. Any Virginia Mason associate can stop the line, basically call a patient safety alert for anything that they suspect might be a potential harm or a safety thing. And that's a common practice. An administrator on call comes down to the work on the Gemba within a few minutes. It's a very positive discussion. There's no stigma associated with it. So it's something that's in the culture and talked about day in and day out. So that it's just happening all the time.
So one other thing I'd like to come back to, this idea of a process of innovation. I would assume then that it's possible for an organization or individuals to learn how to be more innovative. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So again, if it's directed creativity implemented, the directed part comes from a project definition. So that's often done before you assemble a team. The implemented part is lean, PDSA thinking and those kinds of things. So focusing on can you teach people to be creative? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are dozens and dozens of tools for getting people to come up with creative ideas. They're based on three simple principles or three simple mental actions: attention, escape, and movement. You pay attention to something that's in the environment that you might not have noticed before or paid much attention to. You escape the way you currently do things. You escape your industry and say, how do others do it? And then you move in a brainstorming sort of sense to say, let's generate 7, 10 ideas on this. We're not looking for one idea. We're looking for looking for 10 or 15. And you can teach each of those mental actions to people pretty easily and facilitate them in creative thinking exercises. It's not difficult.
Yeah, and there's a lot of lean methodology around that guided brainstorming. If you look at lean design or quote unquote 3P initiatives, mm-hmm. There's always a lot of focus around brainstorming 7 or 8 possible layouts, not just the first one you think of. I think sometimes people in lean would call this set-based design, this idea of sort of trying to stretch the boundaries. I often prompt teams to try to come up with something that's intentionally silly and outlandish, because there might be something that's learned from that, even if it's not practical. I think as we're brainstorming and iterating and experimenting, I think a lot of times people that have that really superficial understanding of lean, like you said, they think it's all about structure and doing things the same way, and they don't see some of the methods there for that creativity.
But it's got to be more than just brainstorming, because mm-hmm. you can come up with 7 ways to arrange a layout, and you look at it and you realize all 7 of them still have a waiting room and a receptionist and right. and those kinds of things. So in addition to the movement, let's come up with 7 ways. The attention and escape is just as important. So you throw out a provocation, it's called in the creativity literature, and say there's a highly infectious disease that there's no cure for, and it is now illegal. It's a federal law was just passed. You can't have more than 2 people in a space at the same time, which means we can't have a waiting room. How are we going to handle flow through our clinic? So you take the waiting room off the table. You pay attention to the fact that you always have a waiting room. You escape it. You throw it off the table and say, now give me a design, and that throws them into a different mode of saying, I've got to really think about this. Yeah, they'll punch a kiosk when they enter the parking lot, and that way we'll know that they're coming. So we'll pull their medical record, and as they walk in the door, we'll already have them assigned to a exam room space, just the same way that a rental car company already has your car in a space and tells you which space it's in. So they'll go into their own room, and while they're in there, they could watch some videos, because we know that there's a diabetic in room 7. Let's run some diabetic nutrition videos in that room while they're in there. So once you give them the provocation, healthcare people are incredibly creative at dealing with a crisis. So make up a crisis, like we can't have a waiting room, and it's amazing the ways they'll come up with, and then they step back and go, actually we could do some of that. We could really do some of that, couldn't we? Yeah. And so the Kirkland Clinic at Virginia Mason has no waiting rooms. There are no waiting rooms. It's a clinic, and it doesn't have a waiting room. It's got some space. It's got a Starbucks in there and all that kind of stuff. If you happen to show up early, you've got something you can do. Right. But there is no waiting space. You flow through the clinic.
Yeah. Well, and it's really exciting to see what innovators like Virginia Mason are doing to challenge the way it's always been done. We have to have a waiting room, and instead of saying let's make it nicer and more comfortable, let's blow up that old assumption and do without. Maybe as we start to wrap up here. One thing you mentioned in the book, Paul, are 7 dimensions of culture at Virginia Mason and supporting innovation. Is maybe just because of lack of time, and people should go buy the book and read the whole thing. What is there one key dimension of culture that you think is particularly unique or interesting that we could talk about here?
I'm often asked that question, and I wish I could give the answer that is desired and tell you, yeah, there's one that matters. But all the research suggests that all 7 are kind of important. Okay. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to have some resources and some tools for innovation. You have to share information widely. You have to set some targets and directions for innovation. You have to have recognition of innovation, and then you have to build relationships such that people can brainstorm from diverse idea points. If you put a bunch of doctors in a room together, you're going to get a doctor-based idea about what to do next. You put a bunch of nurses you're going to get a nurse-based idea. If you put doctors and nurses and housekeepers and patients and some teenage kids in a room, you could come up with something that no one of them could have come up with. But you can only do that if there's a respectful environment in that space. So all of those things are part of the culture of innovation, and they all have to be in place if you're going to be a highly innovative organization.
Yeah. Well, maybe as we wrap up here, Paul, if you can tell people where they can learn more about the book and your own work. Again, the book is Accelerating Healthcare Transformation with Lean and Innovation, the Virginia Mason Experience. Where should people go look, Paul?
I have a website which has all my contact details and some other materials up on it. It's www.directedcreativity. That's all one word, directedcreativity.com. And you can follow me on Twitter. It's my name, Paul Plsek, just as one thing. The last name is an interesting spelling. It's PLS. So that's 3 consonants in a row, PLSEK. But Paul Plsek at Twitter, at Paul Plsek on Twitter will link you in.
Okay, well, I hope people will check that out. And again, if people go to the show notes, the blog post for this episode, they'll find you'll find links to all of that. So. Really fascinating stuff. I'm glad, Paul, that you're highlighting the topic of lean and innovation and helping people and healthcare organizations see the connections and how this goes hand in hand. Do you have any final thoughts on that topic to leave us with?
No, I think this. I hope this is our last wave of yet another set of methodologies that are going to save healthcare. Let's stop messing around and let's pick a methodology and let's do it deeply and make it happen. We're all getting older, and we're all going to depend on the healthcare system in the future. And if it's if it's still as wasteful and error prone as it is today, that's a sad commentary.
Yeah, well, we've got to get it done, and I'm glad Virginia Mason has that constancy of purpose, and they're setting a great example for others. So thank you, Paul, for sharing that in the book and in our discussion today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.